Alright, so hey everyone, today I want to take a look at Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. This is the original version of the game. I've covered the remastered Re-Reckoning edition a little after its launch, as well as recently, since they updated the movement dead zone a bit. I had always assumed that the original version of the game had the same exact controls as the remaster, and so I never bothered testing it. But I did so pretty much immediately after I did the updated video, and it turns out that it is different and is better than the remastered version. So the camera uses about a 20% axial dead zone, and to compare this with the remaster uses a 40% axial dead zone. So the original dead zone is half the size of the remasters. Axial dead zones restrict diagonal movement around the axes, and the amount of which depends on the size. So at 20%, I can make these bobbing motions, and as long as I'm moving the stick within this region, it's moving perfectly horizontally. You only start seeing diagonal movement occur once you break out into these green regions, which is beyond both axis dead zones. And this is more obvious when looking straight up or down, and then looking for horizontal movement. At 40%, this restricts quite a bit more diagonal movement. So the original has more of the stick that's allowed to create diagonal movement. The shaded regions represent a jump in acceleration, and I'm using the minimum camera sensitivity to exaggerate this. And these thresholds are perfectly straight, so you can see as my stick ends up falling under this, acceleration stops. This applies vertically as well, and you can see as I'm going right under this, it's pretty slow, but if I move in this threshold, you can see the same jump in acceleration. Since these thresholds are straight, the acceleration threshold would make a square shape, but since my stick can't reach that far, I'm not able to access that threshold in the diagonal regions. For the movement, this lower threshold represents the threshold to make the character pivot in a direction, but they don't move. The outer threshold has the character begin moving. As far as the pivoting motion, it seems like you have to make a pretty significant change to where the original facing is before you repivot. And that happens whether you're within the region or just entering the region. But when you do pivot, it matches stick movement. This doesn't matter too much because once you begin moving, you're going to move in that direction regardless. There is no restricted diagonal movement in the movement, so small angular changes around the axis will be reflected in the character's movement. And it might be a little difficult to see, but if I move the stick quickly around this axis, you can see the character vibrating, so they are responding to these slight changes in their angular movement. Oops, that doesn't work too well walking forward because of the camera following. This is not the case in the remaster, which has about 25% axial dead zone. So similar to the camera, if you move the stick anywhere within 25% of the axis, you'd end up moving perfectly forward instead, and you'd have to make more dramatic angles before you would start seeing diagonal movement occur in the remaster. The shaded region represents the sprint threshold. So if you try pressing the button or holding it when you're under the threshold, nothing will happen. But if you're over the threshold and then press the button or hold it, you'll begin sprinting. And if you fall under the threshold, you'll stop sprinting. In the remaster, because of the axial dead zone, this threshold is skewed, and around launch, most of the threshold was actually outside of this graph. And that's a little dangerous because, as you can see, my stick can comfortably lean outside of this graph in the diagonal regions. But that can vary between controllers and players. And some players may not be able to access the thresholds in the diagonal regions, and because of that, may not have been able to sprint diagonally. That was updated, so the threshold still bleeds outside of the graph, but not as much, so the majority of players should never see that as an issue. But with a perfectly circular threshold like this, that's not an issue at all. The camera dead zone is also circular, but it's much larger, so it's about 50%. And this does have full diagonal movement, same as the movement dead zone, and I'll use the top of the world map to demonstrate this. So if I fall a little under this axis, you can see that it's deviating under it, and if I fall a little above this, you can see that it's moving to move above it. So you do have full diagonal movement for the map cursor as well. This is something that isn't the case in the remaster either. Similar to the movement there is about a 25% axial dead zone that restricts that for map movements. Oops. So that about covers it. It's kind of unfortunate that the original Kingdoms of Amalur has better dead zones than the remaster. I had again assumed that they were the same, and I wasn't too bothered with them, being axial, because I assumed, that's not any worse than the original game was. But for the remaster to have added axial dead zones that the original one didn't is a bit unfortunate, and I don't know if there's still a final update that's can be released for the game, but it would be nice to see that updated so that it matches the original game, which as far as movement is concerned is excellent, where the remaster can be a bit clunkier because of how much of the stick is only outputting 4 directions. Of course, you don't need much precision in this game for movement or camera movement, but smaller dead zones as well as full diagonal movement would be preferable. But either way, that about covers it. So thanks for watching, and everyone, have a good rest of your day.